I feel like just yesterday I made my What I Watched in February video, and now I'm making my What I Watched in August video. I seriously can't believe it. The first movie I watched was The Irishman. The Irishman was an unbelievably long film. Seriously, you could watch Dumbo 3 times during this movie and it still wouldn't be over. Movies like Titanic, The Patriot, Schindler's List, or Zack Snyder's Justice League don't feel as long as they are. Unfortunately, with this, I did feel the runtime. Thankfully, it wasn't very boring, but it did feel really long. It took up so much time, and it's not a film I see myself watching much because of that. This movie is very well made, and I think that the look of it is very appealing. Scorsese's direction is great, and De Niro, Pesci, and Pacino all work so well together, giving outstanding performances. Before seeing this, I had only seen De Niro in War with Grandpa, and I had only seen Pesci in Home Alone, so there was a major tone difference between their performances, and it was great. This was my first gangster epic, and specifically my first Scorsese gangster epic, and it was great. I know I would have liked it more if it was shorter, but if I'm going to get more into Scorsese's filmography, I guess I'm going to have to get used to long runtimes. I do recommend this movie, and it is once again another great movie released in 2019. 2019 may be my new favorite year for film. Next, I watched Edgar Wright's Cornetto Trilogy. The first film of the trilogy, Shaun of the Dead, was possibly the greatest introduction to Edgar Wright I could have gotten. I don't think I've ever laughed this hard while watching a film. Okay, that might be a bit of a stretch, but I laughed really hard. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost worked so well together, and I loved the banter between them. Their reactions to the zombies was priceless, and when they met the first zombie for the first time, I laughed so hard. This is easily the best zombie apocalypse movie that I've seen, and I loved it. Sometimes out of nowhere there would just be over-the-top gore, which was hilarious, and seeing Sean lead this group of people to a place he thought would be safe, it wasn't, was very fun too. For the first 40 minutes of Hot Fuzz, I just thought it was a pretty good comedy, but man, after the plot picked up, it was absolutely phenomenal. I personally don't think it was quite as funny as Shaun of the Dead, but oh my gosh, this film had an insane twist that I literally could never have seen coming, and the action was just so good. On paper, the twist isn't very good, but I'm telling you, it works. There were some suspenseful moments, but the amazing comedy always made me laugh. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost gave amazing performances, and even though I do not like Jim Broadbent as an actor, he did pretty well. There was some surprisingly heartfelt dialogue, which I didn't expect at all, nonetheless was great. The final 30 minutes was crazy, hilarious, exciting, violent, and was just so good. Going into this, I wasn't aware of the mystery aspects of this, and they were a surprise, but a welcome one for sure. I had no clue I would love this so much, but it was just a phenomenal film from director Edgar Wright. Like many people say, The World's End is the weakest in the Cornetto Trilogy, but that doesn't make it bad. In fact, it is really great. It easily had the best visuals in the Cornetto Trilogy, but what makes it the weakest is that it isn't as funny as the others. The comedy was the thing I was most looking forward to in this film, and yes, this movie does have some clever jokes. It never made me laugh out loud. That said, it did have lots of really amazing action. The choreography was outstanding in this, and the concept about the robots was really fun. It took a long time to actually get to the robots plotline, but it was worth the wait. There was also some heart to this film, and it is still a great addition to the Cornetto Trilogy as well as Edgar Wright's filmography. Gary King is a really great character that had a great arc, which is something I didn't know Edgar Wright could pull off, but he definitely did. Edgar Wright is one of my new favorite directors. The Cornetto Trilogy is one of my new favorite trilogies. After that, I watched Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained. It was really good. It's better than the other Tarantino film I've seen, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I really liked it. The cast was great, and everyone's performance was great. Calvin Candy was such a hateable character, yet at the same time was very likable because of some of the writing, and especially DiCaprio's amazing performance. Jamie Foxx is in multiple bad movies, but Django Unchained isn't one of them. I don't really like the Western genre, but I always force myself to watch movies in it, and somehow they always turn out great. The genre has good movies, but I don't really like its feel as a whole. This movie had some good comedy as well, with Jonah Hill in one scene and a couple other times. I really loved the soundtrack to this film too. It played Western music, but also a variety of other things, which was really entertaining. I think it would have kept my attention more if it was a bit shorter, not much, just a little. I thought this was a great film, and I am excited to watch more of Tarantino's filmography. Then I watched the Fear Street Trilogy. If you would like, you can watch my ranking of the trilogy in the iCard. On the 7th, I rewatched Clue. It isn't quite as good as it was before, but it is still a really hilarious comedy that I still love. Next up, I watched The Big Lebowski. This was my first Coen Brothers film, and I did not like this. The best part was the performances. I did really like Jeff Bridges and John Goodman in their roles. Their roles, however, were bad. The characters were very unlikable, unfunny, etc. Some scenes looked cheap, and I didn't like the script. Everything was so weird, and it just left a bad taste in my mouth. I wish I loved this like so many people do, but I can't say I did. It wasn't enjoyable or anything, and a bad pick for my first film of the Coen Brothers. I can't say I'm excited to watch more of their films. It also felt like it didn't really have a plot. It felt like they used the first draft of their script and just went with it and made the best movie that they could, which isn't a very good movie. You might say that's the point, but I still don't like it. You might disagree with me, but
that's just like, your opinion, man.
Then I watched Midsommar. As the sophisticated film critic that I am, what the heck is this? This was absolutely insane. I've said that about multiple films, but wow, this seriously has some insane stuff that I can't even begin to comprehend. I know the director said to go in with caution, but man, it surprised me in almost every way. Watching this film is basically sitting through an endless hole of suffering, and for that, I don't know if I'll ever rewatch this. Florence Pugh killed it in this, and everything was so believable and disturbing. It wasn't scary at all, it was so bright and colorful, which made it so creepy and weird. Ari Aster proved to me that he can make a creepy and disturbing film, which makes me excited to see Hereditary. Don't know when I will. I was actually going to watch Hereditary and Moonlight instead of this, but then my Showtime subscription decided to fail me, so I obviously ended up watching this. This movie is definitely not for everyone, therefore I don't recommend it because you might get seriously disturbed. This movie is super crazy. The same day, I watched Bo Burnham Inside. On the surface level, Bo Burnham Inside seems immature, but it also has a deep and hidden meaning. The songs are genuinely good in my opinion, and some of it was pretty funny, but I wouldn't classify it as a comedy special like Netflix does. All of it is very clever the way Bo Burnham incorporates comedy, but also sadness and loneliness. I'm aware that Bo Burnham directed the A24 film 8th Grade. I really liked this, and I really like the studio A24, so hopefully I'll watch that soon. For a film's crew only including one or two people, one of them writing, directing, starring, composing, editing, producing, etc., this is pretty impressive and unlike anything I've ever seen. My biggest problem with this is its rewatchability factor. All of it is enjoyable with the use of upbeat music, but something about it isn't calling me to rewatch it. This isn't really a movie, it's a special or a documentary, and for that I don't really know exactly how to describe my thoughts and opinions on it because I'm not used to reviewing this type of media. Anyways, I did not expect this to be so powerful. Bo Burnham Inside was great. On the 11th, I watched Poltergeist. Dang, that house is haunted, am I right? I wanted to watch Poltergeist for such a long time, and it sure did live up to my hype. It may be old, sometimes cheesy, and most of the effects may be dated, but it is still very creepy. Nothing frightening, but some of it kind of creeped me out in a way I want horror movies too. Some scenes were pretty scary in my opinion, and I loved it so much. I think it's really cool how Spielberg directed most of this, but he already had a big film coming out that same summer, so they just gave the credit to the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper. Of course, Tobe Hooper did some of the movie too, but Spielberg did some as well. Some people will pick on this for being outdated, but despite that, I think that this is an amazing haunted house movie and one of the best horror movies to go down in history. Though I'm no one to judge because I still haven't seen some horror classics like Scream, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist, The Shining, etc. The whimsical score also accelerates the eeriness to each scene, and I believe that it doesn't get enough credit. When they got the daughter back, for some reason, it made me kind of sad. I don't know why, seeing the characters' tears of joy was just so bittersweet and was kind of sad. I would also like to add that the climax at the very end is easily one of my favorite scenes in all of horror films, period. Oh yeah, and does anyone else think it's strange that a lot of the main cast died after this film's release, including the young girl when she was only 12 years old? Coincidence? I think not. Next, I watched John Hughes' The Breakfast Club. Okay, yeah, I've only seen 3 of his films, but John Hughes is still becoming one of my favorite directors. I'm not the hugest fan of Uncle Buck. I need to rewatch it though, but this and Ferris Bueller's Day Off are pretty great. This might be a comedy, but it did have some pretty serious moments that John Hughes handled very well, and the tone changes never felt off. Most of this was very slow, but it wasn't boring, and I still enjoyed it all thoroughly. There were some fast-paced moments that were utterly amazing, however. The acting and performances from the teens felt so real, and I easily believed their performances, even when some of the stuff they did was pretty fictional. Some of the dialogue was pretty heavy, honestly, for an 80s comedy, but as you would expect, it is funny. John Hughes is just the master at making teen 80s comedies, whether directing, producing, or writing. I definitely need to see 16 Candles soon, and hopefully, once I see all of John Hughes' filmography, I can rank them in my channel. I think I'll be watching Planes, Trains, and Automobiles this Thanksgiving, crossing my fingers. The next day, I watched Baby Driver. I still haven't seen Scott Pilgrim, but this is my least favorite of Edgar Wright's films so far. But since we were talking about Edgar Wright, it is still really great. The sound mixing was kind of back and forth between loud and quiet, but the sound editing with the music and the fight sequences was great. Baby isn't a great character, but he was pretty likable, and I always wanted to see him succeed. With a cast featuring stars like Jamie Foxx, Kevin Spacey, and Lily James, I expected the acting to be great, which it was, unsurprisingly. There was some really great action, especially towards the end, and that was the part of the film where I was the most hooked. I'd be lying if I said that I was fully invested throughout the entire film, but for the times I was, it was really great. If I ever rewatch this, the score could get bumped up to a 9, but right now it is at an 8, and my least favorite of Wright's movies. Still great. After that, I watched Shark Tale. Watched this on my birthday, and yeah, just as bad as I expected, but at the same time super fun and hilariously bad. Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese playing gangster fish in an animated kids movie, something I never thought I would see. Jack Black played probably the most unfunny character he has ever in his career, but Will Smith was pretty good even though all of the characters were really bad. This is definitely one of those movies that's so bad it's good, and I can definitely see myself watching this again because of how enjoyably bad it is. Also on my birthday, I watched Insidious. For a PG-13 horror movie, this movie was really scary. Some scenes and moments genuinely creeped me out. It's really fake, but it definitely made me jump, which is exactly what I wanted. It delivered on great scares that I loved. I don't know what I expected. I mean, it's the director of The Conjuring and a bunch of other horror movies. It was just a really great horror movie. I will probably be watching the sequel in October for the spooky season, as this left off on a big cliffhanger and I really liked it. The acting is really good and believable, and the script was simple but effective, and was very good as well. Not one of the best horror movies, but definitely not one of the worst. On the 15th, I watched Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead. If this film does anything for me, it makes me excited for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. According to Elizabeth Olsen, this movie is bringing Sam Raimi back to his classic horror roots, and that makes me unbelievably excited. The Evil Dead wasn't scary at all, but still, you get the point. This movie is really great for an early 80s low-budget indie horror movie, but also when comparing it to other films of its kind, it doesn't really stand out to me. This is one of those horror movies that uses an abundance of graphic violence and gore to try to scare the audience, and that kind of works, but also kind of doesn't, in my opinion. This movie is still very enjoyable and a bit campy, though. Because of its low budget, the score didn't really work for me at all. Sometimes there were scenes I thought would have been a lot scarier and better if they played music instead of playing nothing. And when they did play music, they chose the wrong piece of music, in my opinion. Sometimes the score was great, but when it wasn't, it bothered me quite a bit. Bruce Campbell did pretty good, but the rest of the cast was average. I feel like sometimes they embraced the campiness of the film a little too much, but the low-budget feel this film has did make it more realistic than it would with all of the CGI jump scares, perfect lighting, and that kind of stuff we get in modern horror movies today. I'm probably never going to watch the sequels, but this was still a solid horror flick. Oh, and why were the bruises on Ash almost a sparkly purple? That's my question. Not gonna lie, when that one girl started singing, "We're gonna get you, not another peep, kinda gonna see," with that big ol' smile on her face, that was probably the scariest moment in the film. That was, something else, let me tell ya. Once when Ash yelled back to her, "Shut up, Linda," I did laugh super hard though because that was totally out of context. Then I watched The Shawshank Redemption. The Shawshank Redemption is known by many for being one of the greatest films ever made, and even though I don't give it a 10 out of 10, it is still a masterpiece. The movie is basically perfect, but for some reason I don't feel comfortable giving it a 10 out of 10 yet. I didn't think that the first 30 minutes were all that great, but after that it was definitely phenomenal. I bet if I rewatch it, it'll move up to a 10 or at least a 9.5. I'm struggling to find the right word to describe this film, but the ending was definitely very heartwarming. Seeing these characters finally get out of prison and meet each other in the real world is something truly amazing to see, and Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman sold it perfectly. You felt sad for their characters sometimes, but also happy for them sometimes. It's one of those films that makes you feel like you're going to cry tears of joy at the end. I didn't, but it was so inspirational and heartfelt. I actually own this on DVD now, so I'll probably rewatch it in the next year or so. I'm honestly surprised that this lost to Forrest Gump for Best Picture the year it came out. I think I like Forrest Gump more, but this seems like the type of film the Oscars would choose. Nonetheless, they both deserve it, and The Shawshank Redemption is one of the only masterpieces I give a 9 out of 10. It's a perfect film, I just don't know if I'm ready to give it a 10. Next, I watched the entire Fast Saga. This was torture! Go check out my ranking of the films if you want, that's about all I got to say. After that, I watched the new film Free Guy. I'm not going to give you my score for it yet because I'm going to make a review of it, but I did really like it. And finally, I watched 3 of the G.I. Joe movies, the original animated one, Rise of Cobra, and Retaliation. I actually have watched Snake Eyes, but that was technically in September, so that'll be in the next What I Watched This Month video. Oh yeah, and also, I'm going to rank these movies if you really care, they're all bad. Well, that's what I watched in September. I watched so many great movies, but also a lot of horrible movies. Fast and Furious, G.I. Joe. But until then, stay tuned and subscribe to Cinema Ranks.